earlier this week, we were celebrating the anniversary of Woodstock, and we wanted to talk about Woodstock a little bit more. And this time, we have brought in a kind of a local expert on the music scene, I guess we could say. Irving from the Songbirds Guitar Museum. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so talking about Woodstock, such an iconic and historic musical event, just in general, where do you think we'd be today, music-wise, with or without that event?
Well, you know, at that point, that event, it kind of brought a lot of that music, which was not necessarily that popular at that time, to the forefront. This was more what they referred to as more of an underground scene. That was kind of a new thing. A lot of the commercial radio. Back then, we had transistor radios, and we listened to AM radio. And it's where all the hits that the record companies were putting out, what they wanted you to hear, you would hear. People were discovering these new underground FM radio stations that would play music, and instead of playing like a 3-minute hit song, they'd play a 7-minute song or a 15-minute song with a long jam in it. And so all of a sudden you'd start to be able to hear bands like Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin or Cream or whatever was going on at the time. Woodstock was obviously this this phenomenon. It was a festival in upstate New York. I think they expected maybe 30,000, 40,000 people to show, and they got about 500,000. And one of the things they did is they were actually filming the festival, and they actually got a great crew to film it. It was really filmed well. And so about 6 months after the festival, obviously the festival was such a big thing, it got all sorts of press and whatever. When the movie came out 6 months later, it blew up the career, it just blew skywide high the careers of certain acts that were on that show and in that movie.
And now you're with Songbirds Museum, which is of course down here right in downtown. Talk to me about the museum and how Woodstock's reflected in many ways throughout the exhibits.
Oh, well, you know, all those iconic guitars that were played in that era and played by many of the artists in those in the festival and in the movie. We've got replica, you know, we've got the real deals, you know, down in the museum.
Right.
Obviously, we've got all these classic vintage guitars from even before Woodstock and through that era. You know, if you watch the Woodstock movie, you'll actually see certain artists playing these old guitars. Maybe it was all they could afford at the time. They were not, you know, they were young kids and bands. Again, there was a band called Canned Heat. There was a young white blues band. Blues was a big thing back then, up and coming. And you know, if you watch the movie in Canned Heat, you'll see Al Wilson, one of the guitar players, playing like a 1954 gold top Les Paul, which he liked. It was good for what, you know, and again, when a young person like myself from that era went to see the movie and you saw those guitars, you know, you'd run out to the music store looking for these guitars.
Absolutely. And so now we can see those at Songbirds. And I know before, during the commercial break, you were mentioning some of your personal memorabilia that's in there, some of the backdrops, the tickets and different things like that.
Yeah, I saved all my ticket stubs as a kid, so when we were looking for ideas for backdrops, a couple of backdrops have got photographs of these old ticket stubs from shows I saw, you know, some Hendrix, some Allman Brothers at the Fillmore, all these classic shows, you know. I also brought with me today a program from the Woodstock Festival.
Right. We were flipping through that a little bit earlier, and if you want to point out a couple pages that you really remember or find really interesting that reflects on the event, tell us about those.
Well, again, it's interesting. You know, you look through here and you see the bands that performed here. Well, I saw this picture of Hendrix, had to have it, and finally, the last day of camp, I said, I'll pay you for it, and I gave, for $1, I got this program.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Well, do you really think at the time anyone anticipated Woodstock would have this much of a significance and be this important in today's musical history?
Not at all, not at all. Again, much like the Beatles were an absolute phenomenon, what happened with them. And in the world of concerts, Woodstock was really kind of like the Beatles. It was really a phenomenon, how everything just came together, you know, except for the weather.
Right.
Everything really did come together. The lineup of music was amazing. The quality of music back then. You know, you watch that film. You know, it was one thing watching it, you know, when I was a kid, when I was 14 or 15. But I go back and watch it now, you know, at the age of 60. And you're looking at 21, 22-year-old kids in these bands, and the level of talent and the quality of the performances, everybody was just so good. The cream really rose to the top back then. To get a record deal and whatever, you had to
Musicians are not quite the same today as they were back then.
Well, anybody could do it in their bedroom now, so you've got to really weed through a lot of music to find that cream of the crop music.
All right, so if you want to see some of the memorabilia from Woodstock, or actually music through the ages, we should say, be sure to visit Songbirds right there on Station Street near the Chattanooga Choo Choo. Irving, thanks for joining us.
We also have a new exhibit opening up actually this coming Saturday. It's Women in Music. We're going to feature 14 in our green room when you take our all-access tour. It'll feature the history of the pioneers of women guitar players in music, starting with Mother Maybelle Carter, Elizabeth Cotton, all the way up to Sheryl Crow, Bonnie Raitt, Joni Mitchell, etc.
Perfect. I can't wait to see that then. That sounds really exciting. Of course, so be sure to check them out. Give them a call. Thanks for walking down memory lane with us.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back on Let's Chat.